Hi everyone. I'm aware that I'm a little late, but that's primarily the fault of the very interesting guys at Unacademy, whom I was busy talking to until now. Welcome to this session. My name is Anirudh. I'm an educator with Unacademy. I primarily teach history. I'm a huge history nut. I teach everything from Indian to world history and everything in between. This session is basically going to be about the evolution of humankind and of the evolution of human civilization, which I think you'll find is quite different from the way that we usually perceive it. Hi again, and let's get started. To begin with, I want you guys to think about something that's a little difficult to imagine, alright? So, I want you to think of a time 13.8 billion years ago. 13.8 billion years ago, there was an event called the Big Bang. Now, we call it the Big Bang, but actually speaking, back then, if you were there, you could have put that whole thing into your pocket. Because 13.8 billion years ago, there was something that I find a little hard to describe. Okay, so just imagine uh, a kind of existence where nothing was never anywhere. There was no such thing as time and space, because frankly, time and space didn't exist. What you did have though was matter, and this matter gradually began to coalesce and formed a little egg. And out of this egg came the Big Bang. And the Big Bang didn't instantly create the universe as we know it. The Big Bang first created the building blocks of matter called quarks. And over the next few 100,000 years, quarks gradually began to form protons and neutrons. Protons and neutrons gradually began to interact with electrons and form the first molecules, hydrogen and helium. Hydrogen and helium then pulled themselves together with gravity to create stars. And stars gradually began to explode and create even more elements. And basically this went on for quite a long time, nearly I'd say about 9 billion years. And 9 billion years later, we start to see the formation of our own solar system. And so roughly 4 billion years ago, you will start to see the beginnings of the solar system and the planet Earth. And for a long time, Earth was not really a very hospitable place either. So Earth was basically this. If you had been there, you would have thought it was like hell. There was a lot of lava. There were perpetually volcanic explosions. There was acid rain, and we didn't even have oceans for the longest time. Over millions of years, we gradually began to have oceans. The Earth began to heat up, then it began to cool down. There wasn't any oxygen in the air, obviously, because there was no life. And in that chemical soup, in that acid rain that we used to call our oceans and our atmosphere, somehow, we can't really be sure, life began to evolve. But not life as we know it. Life in the form of proteins. And these proteins gradually began to come together and form little microorganisms like bacteria. Now, there was nothing really special about these bacteria. All that they could do was maybe feed off some of the chemicals in the ocean. But gradually, through a process of evolution, that also began to change. They formed the first, yeah, Amit, that's right, it's technically some form of amoeba. So gradually, over the course of millions of years, they began to evolve the process of photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is something that you would have studied in school, right? So photosynthesis is basically the conversion of solar energy into sugar. And that's the basis of almost every modern chemical reaction you see, right? So photosynthesis began to, yes, a lot of very active people here on the platform looks like. So photosynthesis basically began to build life. You had these little cells that were capable of making sugars. Gradually these single-celled organisms became multicellular organisms. And these multicellular organisms began to get larger and larger. You started to have fish. They started to eventually get onto land. They started to form ferns and more kinds of plants. And at some point, we can't be entirely sure when, some of the fish in the sea began to walk. They began to come onto land. All right? And those are our most fundamental ancestors. I think it's a little counterintuitive to say that humans evolved from fish, but that's a scientific truth. So let's move a little further ahead, a few million years, and we start to see the evolution of mammals. So you guys know what mammals are, right? So mammals are basically animals that have fur, that give birth to live young, and that nourish the young with milk that they produce. So there was a certain kind of mammal called a monkey. A lot of apes living in Africa, and some of these apes were a little different from the rest, because instead of climbing trees, they used to walk on the ground. And they don't really walk in the conventional sense, not on four legs, but on two legs. Now, why is that important? Because if an ape can walk on two legs, that means its biology has to be a little different. Its legs have got to be longer. Its biology has got to be a little different. More importantly, because it can stand on two legs, its brain can be bigger, right? So as the brains of these organisms, of these creatures, began to get larger and larger, and they began to give rise to the first species of humans. And I don't mean humans in the sense of modern humans like us, right? Homo sapiens is just one of many species of humans that existed. Let me give you an example. So they were living in Europe. There would be creatures like Homo neanderthalensis. In some parts of Asia, there were creatures like Homo erectus. Now, all of these were species of humans, but they were different from us because they didn't really control the environment the way that humans did. At least Homo sapiens did. So what makes Homo sapiens different? In fact, when did Homo sapiens evolve? And how did Homo sapiens win when all the other human species have become extinct by now? And the answer to that lies in the way we think. And so let me tell you a little more about the way that we think that makes us different from other animals, right? Humans have something called long-term, not just fire. What made us discover fire? And that's the question. What made us different from the animals that allowed us to invent fire in the first place? Basically, it comes down to the way that we communicate. So most animals you'll see have some very basic form of language, right? I mean, if a monkey yells, then it's probably because there's a tiger around and all the other monkeys can understand that meaning and they'll run away. But a human can form much more complex words. And the more complex the words are, the more it can communicate with the language, right? So it can communicate very complex ideas. That enables humans to coordinate much more effectively. And because we can coordinate more effectively, we can be more successful than most species. So it's not just a question of the language itself, it's also a number of different factors. If we talk about the fact that we have long-term memory, for example, the fact that we have visual languages where we can convey things we can convey things that seem very abstract. So for example, if I were to tell you that, okay, so there is such a thing as God, and God thinks that you should behave in a certain way, you might actually believe me. You might actually change your behavior based on something that you can't actually see. But if I were to go to a chimpanzee and tell him, chimpanzee, you have to behave this way because God exists and God says this is wrong, the chimpanzee isn't going to fucking believe me. The chimpanzee doesn't really care about anything that he can't objectively see. No, that's not true. Elephants can't communicate better than us. Do you see elephants building rocket ships, for example? No, because elephants can't communicate the way that we do. So moving a little forward, right? So these early humans, Homo sapiens, used to coordinate and build tribes, for example. These tribes were very efficient at hunting big game. They were called hunter-gatherers. So they would feed on a multiplicity of different things. So some of them would feed on mammals at a certain time of the year, and another time of the years maybe they'd gather berries and so on and so forth. It's all right, Amit. You can still, please pay attention. There's so much that you can learn from this session, all right? So yeah, coming back to what I was saying. So basically, yeah. So humans used to feed on multiple different things at multiple times of the year. Sometimes they would even look at wild seeds, maybe throw them on the ground and wait till they grew into plants and then eat those plants. So we call that process domestication of plants, right? We call it agriculture. Now, conventionally, we like to believe that when humans invented agriculture, we immediately began to settle down and start villages. And once we started with villages, we started to build cities. And once we built cities, we started to form states and kingdoms. And that's how human civilization evolved. That's what we generally think, right? But the latest research in that field says that no, that's absolute nonsense. Just because we invented agriculture doesn't mean that we used to settle down. Yes, it's part of anthropology. It's a field called paleoanthropology. So basically, the latest findings in this field say that it's just because we invented agriculture doesn't automatically mean that we began to settle down in villages. So let me give you an example, right? There's a place called Göbekli Tepe. It's a temple that was built roughly 12,000 years ago in Turkey. Now, what's interesting about this place is it's a temple, but it's a temple that wasn't built by a civilization as we know it. It was built by a bunch of hunter-gatherers. Why is that? It's because Because humans are such versatile animals, we would like to get food from as many different sources as possible, right? So if one of those sources failed, we'd still have something to eat. Now, that means that even if we had agriculture, even if we were able to grow plants and eat from them, that doesn't necessarily mean that we would settle down and eat only plants. We'd still be going around hunting and so on and so forth. So, Simranjit, yeah, this is a live session, so you can watch it going ahead and maybe watch the recording later. Yeah, so basically, humans would eat as many different things as they could. So, what was it that made some humans, especially in, let's say, the Indus River Valley in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, decide to just exclusively eat grains? So, yeah, now there's an interesting idea I'd like to bounce off of you, okay? Basically, humans did four great domestications in our course as a species. The first domestication was fire. The second domestication was the domestication of animals like dogs. The third domestication was the domestication of plants. And the fourth and final domestication, and this is the most interesting one, is the domestication of humankind. So how did that happen, right? It seems really strange that we domesticated ourselves. So let me just walk you through the whole thing. Basically, to domesticate humankind means to force us as a species to behave a certain way. Hunter-gatherers are almost like wild animals, right? They like to live out in the wild, they like the open spaces, they don't like living in small, constricted cities. They like to eat a lot of different sources of food. Now, early hunter-gatherers who had just discovered agriculture would have eaten whatever they wanted. But at some point in certain areas of the world, some of these food sources weren't available to them. So if you look at Egypt, for example, the only place where people could live was in the Nile River Valley. If they went outside it anywhere, they end up in the desert where there was nothing else to eat. So in the Nile River Valley, you see people who have to depend only on agriculture for eating stuff, right? And in these very small areas, you would have the existence of certain power structures, which we call kingdoms or states, which would capture that area and force everybody there to just grow crops. So because these people were essentially domesticated or slaves controlled by the state would force them to make stuff for them. The state would use the extra stuff that these villagers made in order to develop culture, in order to develop things like writing and so on and so forth. Now that's a very counterintuitive idea, right? We like to think that, hey, writing was a good thing. Writing helped us keep track of stuff. Writing helped us write epics and become more advanced as a species. But that's not how writing started. In Mesopotamia, in Egypt, writing was first created by states to keep track of taxes. Calendars, mathematics, all of these were created to keep track of when people will be growing crops, when to extract these crops. So it's a different way of looking at the state. We like to think that we ourselves invented governments. We like to think that we invented states to take care of us. But it's actually the other way around. States created themselves to control us. Isn't that interesting? So I find that really, really fascinating. So that makes you rethink the whole way that human civilization has evolved, right? We like to think that as soon as we settle down and start to grow plants, we start with civilization. But civilization is a very, very hollow concept. It's something that's evolved over centuries. The meaning of civilization has changed. Sometimes civilization was just states controlling people. Sometimes it was the downfall of these states and people living as and when they wanted, as they wanted. Like, for example, after the fall of the Roman Empire, where you think that the fall of Rome was a really, really bad thing because it meant there was no high culture, but it might actually have been better for people because they didn't have to pay taxes. And I think that's something we can really identify with today, because a lot of us pay considerable taxes to the government without necessarily getting the services that we want, but the government still survives. Alright, so this is just an introduction to the latest advances in the field of paleoanthropology, and I'll be happy to take any questions now if you guys have any. Alright, so no questions? Okay, alright, so that's absolutely fine. As always, guys, I'm an educator with Unacademy. I have two courses right now, one on Indian history, one on global history. So please feel free to check them out. There should be links in the description below. Yeah, Prashnil, you have a question? Prashnil? Just type out your questions and I'll answer them if I can. All right, so I wish I could speak Hindi very well. I can understand it just fine, but I'm not very fluent with Hindi sadly. Alright, cool. So just check out my courses, guys. My contact details are there. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, any doubts about history, uh, I'd be the basics of what, Simranjeet? Okay, yeah. Let me just wrap this up really quick. So I'll just take you over what I've discussed so far. If think about it this way, okay. So let's say that you think of the entirety of time that has passed since the Big Bang to now as 1 year, okay. So the Big Bang happens at midnight on January 1st, and the evolution of life happens sometime on at 12:55 on December 31st. That's how much time passes between the formation of the universe and the evolution of life. And then the evolution of humankind happens at 12:59 p.m. and the industrial revolution happens in the last second of the 59th minute of 12 p.m. Of 11 p.m. on December 31st. So just we are essentially nothing in cosmic time, and within this entirety of cosmic time, we like to think that we have controlled how civilization is evolved, but that's not the way it works. Civilization has controlled the way that we evolve. Civilization has controlled the way that we behave. Civilization has conditioned us to behave in a certain way so that states and governments can exist the way they are right now. Which means that if we think about this in a new way, maybe we can make governments work better for us, right? So that is the essence of what I've discussed so far. For more details, you can always feel free to check out either of my courses and get in touch with me over email or whatever. It's absolutely great meeting you guys, and I hope to do more of these sessions later on. All right. So bye bye for now.